Jacob Miller had always considered himself a man of simple needs. His farm, nestled on a sprawling piece of inherited land, was his pride and livelihood. Chickens clucked in their coops, the barn stood strong against the winds, and the smell of freshly tilled soil brought a sense of fulfillment no corporate job ever could. But peace, as Jacob was about to learn, was a fragile thing, easily shattered by greed and manipulation. It all started with a knock on his door. Jacob opened it to find a woman in her mid-40s, her sharp features softened only by a too-wide smile. "Hi, I'm Karen Wilson. I represent the newly formed Meadowview Homeowner Association," she said, her clipboard clutched like a scepter. "We're bringing the community together to ensure everyone follows the same standards. It'll increase property values and bring order. You'll love it." Jacob frowned. "I've managed just fine without any association telling me what to do." "Thanks, but no thanks." Karen's smile faltered. "It's not optional, Mr. Miller. Everyone benefits when there's uniformity. We'll expect your compliance." Jacob's refusal was resolute. "My farm's been here for 3 generations. I'm not interested in your rules, fees, or your so-called order." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, but she left without argument. Jacob thought the matter was over. It wasn't. Weeks later, letters began arriving, brightly colored envelopes stuffed with demands. The Homeowner Association was imposing a $200 monthly fee, retroactive to the day they formed. They also required Jacob to repaint his barn to match the neighborhood aesthetic. He tore up the letters and threw them into the fire, but the harassment escalated. Notices appeared on his fence, stating that his property violated zoning codes now enforced by the Homeowner Association. Neighbors whispered about Karen's disdain for rogue landowners who refused to comply. One evening, as Jacob returned from town, he found his driveway blocked by a construction crew. Trucks emblazoned with the logo of Meadowview Developments, a company tied to Karen's husband, were unloading materials. "What's going on here?" Jacob demanded. A foreman approached, clipboard in hand. "We're installing a community pathway through this area." "This is my land," Jacob snapped. "You don't have permission." Karen appeared, her ever-present clipboard in hand. "It's for the good of the neighborhood. The Homeowner Association voted on it unanimously. Besides, the land isn't zoned for exclusive use. It's part of our common area plan now." Jacob's blood boiled. "You don't own this land. Get off my property before I call the sheriff." Karen's smile was venomous. "Do that, Mr. Miller. But I'd hate for this to become a legal matter you're unprepared for." Jacob did call the sheriff, but the officer's response was lukewarm. "It's a civil matter," he said. "You'll need to take it up in court." A week later, Jacob woke to the acrid smell of smoke. His barn was ablaze, the flames roaring hungrily into the night sky. He scrambled to save what he could, but the fire consumed everything: hay, tools, feed, and memories. By the time the fire department arrived, it was too late. The cause? Undetermined, but Jacob had no doubt who was responsible. Karen showed up the next morning, feigning concern. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. "Perhaps this is a sign that it's time to modernize. Sell the land. Let Meadowview Developments bring it to its full potential." Jacob's glare could have cut steel. "Get off my property." Karen left, but her smug smile lingered in Jacob's mind. That was the moment he decided to fight back. He filed a lawsuit against the Homeowner Association, seeking $1,000 in damages for harassment, property destruction, and emotional distress. The legal battle was brutal. Karen's team of high-priced lawyers tried to drown Jacob in paperwork and technicalities. They painted him as a stubborn old-timer, unwilling to adapt. But Jacob was determined. He hired a savvy attorney who uncovered evidence linking the Homeowner Association to the construction company and even suggested foul play in the fire. When the trial began, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Karen, dressed impeccably, sat with her attorneys, exuding confidence. Jacob, in his plain clothes, looked every bit the underdog, but his resolve was unshakable. "Ladies and gentlemen," his attorney began, "this case isn't just about a barn. It's about a man's right to live without fear of harassment and corruption. It's about standing up to bullies who think they're above the law." As evidence was presented, emails, surveillance footage, and testimonies from neighbors who had also been pressured, Karen's confident facade began to crack. By the time Jacob took the stand, the jury was riveted. "I don't want to fight," Jacob said, his voice steady. "I just want to be left alone to live the way my family has for generations. But when people like Karen think they can take what they want, someone has to say no." The trial concluded with a dramatic verdict. The jury awarded Jacob $1,000 in damages, a public rebuke of the homeowner association's tactics. Karen stormed out of the courtroom, her reputation in tatters. Jacob used the settlement to rebuild his barn and ensure his farm's future. The homeowner association, now under scrutiny, dissolved within months. Though the scars remained, Jacob's victory became a symbol of resistance against greed and corruption. And as he stood on his porch looking out over his land, he knew he'd done right, not just for himself, but for anyone who dared to defy the odds. Jacob's victory in court was a hard-won battle, but the war with the homeowner association wasn't over yet. The $1,000 verdict brought him temporary relief, allowing him to rebuild his barn and secure his farm's future. However, Karen and her allies weren't the kind to retreat quietly. What followed was a relentless campaign to ruin Jacob's reputation and undermine his hard-earned triumph. The first sign of retaliation came in the form of an anonymous letter. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address, but its message was clear. "Drop the case and sell your land. You'll regret staying." Jacob crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash, refusing to be intimidated. But the threats didn't stop there. A few days later, Jacob noticed that the fence surrounding his property had been damaged. Wooden planks were torn off, and deep tire tracks marred the soil, as if someone had driven heavy machinery through the perimeter. Jacob reported the incident to the sheriff, but once again, the response was tepid. "We'll look into it," the deputy said, his tone suggesting otherwise. Then came the sabotage. Late one night, Jacob awoke to the sound of running water. He rushed outside to find that the irrigation system he had recently repaired was gushing uncontrollably. Someone had tampered with the valves, causing significant water loss and damaging the equipment. Fixing it would cost thousands, but Jacob's anger only hardened his resolve. "If they think they can break me, they're in for a surprise," he muttered, tightening the bolts on the system himself. The final straw came when Jacob's farm was visited by inspectors from the county. They claimed to have received anonymous tips about code violations, ranging from improper waste disposal to unauthorized structures. Jacob showed them his permits and guided them around the property, his frustration barely concealed. "This is harassment," he said flatly. One inspector shrugged. "We're just doing our job." Jacob knew exactly who was behind the complaints. Karen's smug face flashed in his mind as he envisioned her orchestrating the attack from behind the scenes. But proving her involvement was another matter entirely. He decided it was time to push back with equal determination. Jacob reached out to local journalists, sharing his story with anyone willing to listen. An investigative reporter from the regional news outlet, Lisa Monroe, took an interest in his case. "If what you're saying is true," she said during their first meeting, "this could expose a pattern of abuse by the homeowner association." Jacob handed over a folder containing emails, photos, and a timeline of incidents. "They've been targeting me ever since I refused to join. It's not just me either. My neighbors have stories too, but they're too scared to speak up." Lisa nodded, scribbling notes. "Leave it to me. I'll dig deeper." The resulting article hit the front page of the local paper. "Farmer battles corrupt homeowner association, harassment, sabotage, and a courtroom victory," read the headline. The piece detailed Jacob's ordeal and hinted at financial ties between the homeowner association and Meadowview Developments. The story caught fire on social media, drawing public outrage and putting pressure on local officials to act. Karen's response was swift and furious. She called an emergency homeowner association meeting, rallying her supporters to protect the community's reputation. Jacob heard about the gathering from a neighbor who still sympathized with him. "They're plotting something," the man warned. Sure enough, Jacob began receiving legal notices accusing him of defamation and slander. The homeowner association was suing him for damages, claiming his public statements had harmed their standing. "They're doubling down," Jacob told Lisa, who promised to cover this new development in her follow-up article. The defamation suit forced Jacob back into court, but this time he had the weight of public opinion on his side. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Justice for Jacob," and "Stop Homeowner Association Corruption." Inside, the atmosphere was tense as Karen's lawyers presented their case, painting Jacob as a vindictive troublemaker. When it was Jacob's turn to speak, he addressed the court with the same quiet determination that had carried him through every obstacle. "I'm not the one defaming anyone," he said. "I'm telling the truth about what's happening in this community. If that damages their reputation, maybe it's because they're doing something wrong." The trial dragged on for weeks with both sides presenting witnesses and evidence. But the turning point came when Lisa uncovered a series of emails linking Karen directly to the anonymous complaints and acts of sabotage. Presented in court, the evidence was damning. Karen's composure cracked, and she lashed out during cross-examination, accusing Jacob of destroying the community. Her outburst only served to reinforce Jacob's claims. When the verdict finally came, the judge dismissed the defamation case and ordered the homeowner association to pay Jacob's legal fees. Karen's defeat was total, but Jacob knew better than to celebrate prematurely. "This isn't over until they're held accountable for everything they've done," he told Lisa. As the homeowner association began to crumble under public scrutiny, Jacob's focus shifted to rebuilding trust within the community. He organized a town hall meeting, inviting neighbors to share their grievances and discuss ways to prevent similar abuses in the future. For the first time in months, Jacob felt a glimmer of hope, but deep down he suspected Karen wasn't finished yet. Jacob's town hall meeting was a pivotal moment for the community. Neighbors who had long remained silent about the homeowner association's overreach finally began to speak up. Stories of fines for trivial matters, unauthorized fees, and veiled threats against dissenters poured out, painting a grim picture of Karen's reign over Meadowview. "She fined me $500 because my mailbox wasn't the approved color," one man said, his voice shaking with frustration. Another neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, recounted how Karen had threatened to foreclose on her home over a so-called landscaping violation. Jacob listened intently, taking notes. The extent of the abuse was worse than he had imagined. "We need to take collective action," Jacob told the group. "If we stand together, they can't bully us anymore." The meeting ended with a plan. The neighbors would petition for a full audit of the homeowner association's finances and leadership practices. Lisa Monroe, the investigative journalist, agreed to help by using her platform to amplify their cause. The atmosphere buzzed with newfound hope, but Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done plotting her revenge. His suspicions were confirmed just days later when he received an unexpected visitor. A man in a tailored suit introduced himself as Charles Dunham, a legal consultant representing Meadowview Developments. He claimed to have a mutually beneficial offer for Jacob. "Mr. Miller," Charles began smoothly, "Meadowview Developments recognizes the value of your property. We're prepared to offer you a very generous sum to sell your land and relocate. This could save you a lot of future trouble." Jacob narrowed his eyes. "Future trouble? Are you threatening me?" Charles held up his hands. "Not at all. I'm simply saying that tensions in this community have escalated, and selling now could be in your best interest. Think of it as a fresh start." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Tell Karen and her cronies that this farm isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." Charles's polished demeanor cracked for a moment, revealing a flicker of irritation. "You might regret that decision, Mr. Miller. Have a nice day." The thinly veiled threat solidified Jacob's resolve. He shared the encounter with Lisa, who immediately began digging into Meadowview Developments. What she uncovered was explosive. Financial records showing that the company had funneled money into the homeowner association's accounts, funding Karen's campaigns and initiatives. The arrangement was clearly designed to pressure residents into selling their properties, allowing Meadowview to acquire land cheaply for development projects. Lisa published her findings in a bombshell expose titled "The Corrupt Ties Between Meadowview Developments and the Homeowner Association." The article sparked outrage, drawing attention from local and state officials. Investigations were launched, and Karen found herself at the center of a storm she couldn't control. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. She called a press conference, flanked by a few loyal supporters and attorneys. "These allegations are baseless," she declared, her voice steady but her eyes betraying her desperation. "The homeowner association has always acted in the best interests of the community. We will fight these lies in court." Meanwhile, Jacob and the neighbors pushed forward with their petition. They collected hundreds of signatures demanding Karen's resignation and a full audit of the homeowner association's operations. The petition's delivery to the county commissioner's office was a media spectacle, with reporters capturing every moment. Karen retaliated by escalating her harassment campaign. More inspectors showed up at Jacob's farm, this time armed with vague accusations of environmental violations. Anonymous complaints flooded local agencies, accusing him of everything from noise pollution to illegal dumping. The stress was mounting, but Jacob refused to back down. One night, as Jacob worked late repairing a tractor, he noticed headlights approaching his property. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside to see a black SUV idling near the barn. Before he could approach, the vehicle sped off, leaving behind a chilling message spray-painted on his barn wall. "Leave or else." Jacob reported the incident to the sheriff, but once again, there was little they could do without evidence. Frustrated but undeterred, he installed security cameras around his property, determined to catch whoever was behind the threats. The tension reached a boiling point when the county announced that they would be auditing the homeowner association's finances. Karen's allies began distancing themselves, fearing the fallout. But Karen herself remained defiant, vowing to fight until the bitter end. One evening, as Jacob reviewed security footage from the previous night, he noticed something unusual. A figure in dark clothing had been prowling near his storage shed, attempting to disable one of the cameras. Jacob froze the frame and zoomed in, recognizing the person immediately. It was one of Karen's staunchest supporters, a man who had frequently spoken out against Jacob at community meetings. Armed with this evidence, Jacob contacted the sheriff and Lisa Monroe. The video was damning, and it wasn't long before the man was brought in for questioning. Under pressure, he admitted to acting on Karen's orders, revealing a coordinated effort to intimidate Jacob and other dissenters. The revelation was the final nail in Karen's coffin. With her allies turning on her and the community united against her, she was forced to step down from her position as head of the homeowner association. Legal charges followed, including fraud and conspiracy, and Meadowview Developments faced hefty fines for their involvement. As the dust settled, Jacob felt a sense of vindication, but also exhaustion. The battle had taken its toll, but it had also brought the community together in a way he hadn't thought possible. Standing on his rebuilt porch, watching the sun set over his fields, Jacob knew that the fight had been worth it. His farm and his freedom were secure, at least for now. The battle with the homeowner association and Karen had left Jacob Miller scarred but unbroken. With Karen's resignation and the homeowner association under investigation, the community finally began to feel a sense of relief. But Jacob knew from experience that victory was never the end of the story. It was merely the start of another chapter. Months passed, and the county's audit of the homeowner association's finances uncovered a web of corruption. Embezzlement, unauthorized expenditures, and backdoor deals with Meadowview Developments painted a damning picture. Karen faced charges of fraud and conspiracy, and several of her closest allies were also implicated. The fallout sent shockwaves through Meadowview, but the residents' resolve only grew stronger. Jacob used his portion of the settlement money to invest in the farm's future. He upgraded his irrigation system, repaired the barn, and purchased new equipment. The community began to rally around him, seeing him not just as a stubborn farmer, but as a symbol of resistance against unchecked power. The neighbors who had once whispered behind his back now approached him with gratitude and apologies. "You stood up for all of us," Mrs. Thompson said, tears in her eyes. For a while, life seemed to return to normal. Jacob focused on his crops and livestock, enjoying the simple pleasures that had drawn him to the farm in the first place. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, as Jacob relaxed on his porch, he received a call from Lisa Monroe. "Jacob, I think you need to see this," Lisa said, her voice tense. She forwarded him a link to an online article. The headline read, "Meadowview Developments Resurfaces with New Leadership." The article detailed how the company had restructured under a new CEO and was planning a massive development project in the area, one that would require the acquisition of several properties, including Jacob's farm. Jacob felt the familiar anger rising in his chest. Despite everything, the battle for his land wasn't over. Determined not to be caught off guard, he began attending town meetings, keeping a close eye on Meadowview's activities. The company's representatives spoke in polished, rehearsed tones about progress and community improvement, but Jacob saw through the facade. They were simply picking up where Karen had left off. It wasn't long before Meadowview's tactics turned aggressive. Jacob received another visit from Charles Dunham, the same legal consultant who had approached him months earlier. "Mr. Miller," Charles began, his tone oozing feigned civility, "I trust you've seen our plans. Your property is critical to our vision for the community. We're prepared to offer you double its market value." Jacob leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Not interested. I've told you before, this land isn't for sale." Charles's smile faltered. "We'd hate for things to become complicated." "Progress waits for no one, Mr. Miller." "And neither do I," Jacob shot back, slamming the door in his face. The escalation was swift. Meadowview filed a lawsuit claiming that Jacob's farm violated zoning ordinances, an accusation Jacob knew was baseless. He contacted his attorney, who assured him they had a strong case, but the stress of yet another legal battle weighed heavily on him. Then came the sabotage. Jacob's security cameras captured footage of unidentified individuals damaging his equipment and spray painting threatening messages on his property. "Sell or suffer," one message read. Jacob turned the footage over to the sheriff, but the investigation yielded no arrests. Frustrated but determined, Jacob doubled down on his security measures, installing more cameras and motion-activated lights. Lisa Monroe continued her investigative work, uncovering evidence that Meadowview Developments was bribing local officials to fast-track their projects. The story reignited public outrage, and protests against the company's plans began to grow. Jacob attended every rally, speaking out against the corruption and greed threatening his community. The turning point came when a whistleblower from Meadowview came forward. The former employee provided documents showing that the company's development plans included demolishing existing properties, including historic landmarks and farmland, to make way for luxury housing. Jacob's farm was at the center of their plans. Armed with this new evidence, Jacob and Lisa worked with local activists to organize a massive town hall meeting. Hundreds of residents packed the venue, and tensions ran high as Meadowview's representatives attempted to defend their actions. Jacob stood at the front of the room, his voice steady and resolute. "This isn't about progress," he said, addressing the crowd. "It's about greed. They want to take what isn't theirs and leave us with nothing. But we have the power to stop them. Together we can protect our homes, our history, and our way of life." The room erupted in applause, and the momentum shifted. Under mounting public pressure and ongoing investigations, Meadowview Developments announced that it was suspending its plans indefinitely. The company's CEO resigned, and Charles Dunham quietly disappeared from the community. For Jacob, the victory was bittersweet. The fight had cost him time, energy, and peace of mind, but it had also strengthened his bond with the community. Neighbors who had once been indifferent or fearful now stood united, determined to prevent future abuses. On a crisp autumn morning, Jacob stood on his porch, surveying his land. The field stretched out before him, golden and ripe with promise. He knew the fight wasn't truly over. There would always be new challenges, new threats to his way of life. But for now, he could breathe easy, knowing that he had done everything in his power to protect what mattered most. And as the sun rose over Meadowview, Jacob smiled, ready to face whatever came next.